Hello, and welcome to Week 5, Ethical and Professional Conduct in Behavior Analysis. Today we're going to talk about two more codes. Code 5, Behavior Analysts as Supervisors, and Code 6, Behavior Analysts' Ethical Responsibility to the Profession of Behavior Analysis. So starting with code number 5, Behavior Analysts as Supervisors. Many employers or agencies now, because there's such a shortage of BCBAs, I guess that's the reason, they expect that brand new BCBAs who just passed their exam, just finished their experience requirements and their academic requirements, pass the test, get a BCBA, start supervising brand new behavior analysts in training. In my experience, and I think in BACB's, the Behavior Analysis Certification Board's experience, that doesn't usually work out very well. It really seems to be unfair to both the new BCBA and particularly to the new behavior analyst in training, because that BCBA just doesn't have the experience yet to provide supervision. Obviously, effective supervision of behavior analysts in training is critical to our field, and the academic components are certainly an important piece, but just as important, arguably more important, is the experience that one gets. So I think supervision of behavior analysts in training has become a recent focus of the Behavior Analysis Certification Board, and therefore this new code of ethics contains some new supervision requirements, but also there's several other new requirements for supervisors of BCBAs. The first one is the new supervisor training component. So as you know, before a supervisor can train behavior analysts in training, they have to pass a supervisor training component. Of course, you know that in order to receive supervision, you need a supervisee training component also. Also, though, supervisor training has been added to the continuing education certification cycle, so that now if you want to supervise behavior analysts in training, you need to get a certain number of supervisor training CEUs in each certification cycle. Focusing on the professional and ethical compliance code for behavior analysts, some of the new items in the code, in this new code, are one that a focus much more on the volume of supervisees that a particular supervisor takes on. Again, I think some agencies really put a lot of pressure on BCBAs to supervise other trainees. Now, it depends on what their job is. If their job is just to supervise, okay, they could probably take on several new trainees. But if they also have a full clinical job, they have some administrative responsibilities, it may be tough for them to take on multiple supervisees. So the code now addresses that and basically says that the number you can only supervise the number of supervisees that you can effectively manage. We'll operationalize that in a minute. Additionally, the other new code, the other new item rather in this new code is that supervisors now have the responsibility to formally structure the supervision and training process and provide supervisees with a written description of how supervision is going to happen. So you can't just sit down anymore and chat. What's going on? How did things go? It really has to be structured with clear objectives, clear goals. It needs to be written so everyone knows exactly what the criteria are. I think the way, as a supervisor, you need to approach training supervisees is the same way that an ethical behavior analyst writes a plan. You need to have very clear objectives. It needs to be measurable. You need to have data, and you need to make data-based decisions so that if you can monitor the progress that the supervisee is making. If they're not making the kind of progress that you're expecting, then you need to make adjustments. Go slower. Focus on other things, do more direct supervision, bring in different kinds of readings, bring in less readings, bring in more readings. You need to do some things in order to ensure that the supervisee is progressing. But of course you can't measure that, as you know, just like with a behavior support plan, you can't measure that unless you have clear objectives, clear goals, data, and then you can make data-based decisions. Finally, supervisors generally are responsible to ensure that they and their supervisees are in compliance with the ethics code. So it is the supervisor's responsibility to make sure that in this supervising process that you as the trainee and they as the supervisor are in compliance with the ethical code. All right, let's get into some of the highlights of Code 5, behavior analysts as supervisors. So 5.01 indicates that ethical supervisors supervise only within their areas of competence. So how is that defined? Well, competence is something that you have training and or experience in. That's where I think we run into problems with brand spanking new BCBAs providing supervision. They may not have competence in all the areas that they need to in order to train behavior analysts in training. 5.02 specifically, we talked about this, says supervise only a volume of individuals that allows them to be effective supervisors. So again, the measurement is, are the individuals that you're supervising improving? If they are, well, then I guess you could say that the number that you're supervising is adequate. If they're not, then that may be an indication that you're supervising too many people. The board isn't going to say you could only supervise 5 or 3 or 10 supervisees, because it really depends on a lot of things. The most obvious being, what's your job? Again, if your job is just to supervise, well, you obviously can take on a lot more supervisees. You know, there's as you know, minimum number of hours you have to meet face to face. There's direct observation time. There could be some group meeting time, but then there's going to be some outside readings potentially, some research that I think an effective supervisor is going to do. So it's certainly going to take time. I think some people are just better at supervising than others. They could probably take on more supervisees and do a good job. Which brings us to the next highlight, which is, as I mentioned, the ethical supervisor provides written descriptions of the purpose, the requirements, the evaluation criteria, and the terms of the supervision. The purpose of this is, and now in writing, is that it's very clear how we're going to measure success and what we're going to do. And the trainee needs to be measured and given feedback, 5.06, on their performance based on the written description in 505. The other new component, in addition to focusing on the volume of supervisees in the code, this new code, is that the supervisor needs to establish a system to evaluate how good a supervisor they are. Well, Bailey and Birch do a nice job, I think, of talking about the various ways that you could approach this. But to me, I think focusing again and looking at this whole relationship as a behavior support plan. We're behavior analysts. This is how we do things. We're pretty good at this, and I think we approach this in the same way. That is, as long as you followed 5.05, and that is you have a good written description, it clearly specifies what the supervisee should be doing and able to do, then you could one way you could evaluate your own supervision is how well is the supervisee doing. Other ways, in addition to that, could be having someone else observe, like your supervisor, if you're the BCBA supervising, your supervisor watching your supervising or relationship. So that's a lot of supervising. I'm not sure that's clear. What I'm trying to say is a more senior supervisor, someone who's been doing supervision for longer than you, observe you and your supervisee and give you feedback, evaluate how well you're doing. And then the last part is certainly something that everyone should incorporate, which is the supervisee feedback, is that somehow the supervisee is providing feedback on things like, well, have we met the total number of hours that we specified in, again, back to the written document, a number of times we were supposed to meet, did we cover the areas that we were supposed to cover, etc. So the bottom line on this one is this has become, I believe, a very hot topic for the board, the Behavior Analysis Certification Board, and for our field in general. We've realized that as the number of BCBAs has grown, it's been more difficult to provide that supervision, and that supervision is absolutely critical. So this ethical code is attempting to try to ensure that the ethical supervisor is doing engaging in certain behaviors to increase the likelihood that we will be producing behavior analysts that have meaningful experience and are competent, and they can independently function as effective behavior analysts when they finish their academic and their experience supervision piece. All right. Code 6 has to do with behavior analysts' ethical responsibility to the profession of behavior analysis. And basically, it is saying behavior analysts uphold and advance the values, ethics, principles of applied behavior analysis. Further, that we, as ethical behavior analysts, promote our methodology to the public through presentations, discussions, other kind of media. And I think sometimes students, when I talk about this, feel, well, you know, I'm just working, I'm a new BCBA, I'm working, or I'm a trainee, I'm working in, for example, a school system. You know, this is for this going out and advancing the values, the ethics, and the principles of ABA. That's, you know, for the leaders in the field. And it is. But I think at the grassroots level, it is something that all of us can do, and I would guess it is something that, even though you guys are still even trainees in applied behavior analysis, that most, if not all of you, are already doing to some extent. So, for example, I think whenever you promote the value of reliable data or focusing on behavior. So if you're keeping with you're working in a school system example, that you're emphasizing that, well, we need to collect data. And here's why we need to collect data. In applied behavior analysis, you know, we have to have something objective that we can measure, and that's how we can really determine whether we're making progress or not. Well, you are upholding and advancing the values, ethics, and principles of applied behavior analysis, focusing on explaining to people, and that might be the people who are implementing the plans, it might be their supervisors, it might be the school psychologist, it might be the principal at the school, it might be some parents, but you're explaining to them that the value of doing behavioral assessments before we start treatments. Again, focusing on our ethics, why that's important to us, why you have to follow those rules as an ethical behavior analyst. You are, in fact, upholding and advancing the values, ethics, and principles of the profession. So this is something that I know that the field of behavior analysis feels, well, it's obvious that this is an area where we need to do more work. We are misunderstood. It is harder, and it's becoming more and more obvious that other fields and people don't necessarily listen to what behavior analysts say. I just came back from a national conference on applied behavior analysis and heard a journalist, might be my favorite presentation I went to. He wasn't a behavior analyst, he was a journalist, although his daughter was a BCBA, interestingly. But he was explaining that who you can trust and who you can't trust. And of course he had politicians and journalists at the bottom of the list of people that you can trust. He had engineers at the top and BCBAs as number 2. And the reason he said that is because they use data. and their values, their ethics, and their principles focus on integrity and data-based decisions. And those are really the only kinds of people that you can trust. However, he went on to say, getting people to buy that is really hard because they'd rather hear, celebrities. Oh, they were at the bottom of the list also. Celebrities and politicians and journalists, because they will talk about things and make complex issues seem much easier and simple. If you're not burdened by data, then you can really make up a lot of stuff and certainly make it sound a lot better. If you are burdened by the facts and the data, which we clearly are, then it's harder to sell it to the public. So the point is that I think it's really important that we do this, that every opportunity, and don't think that you have to be at a national conference and have 500 people in the audience in order to have an impact. You can have an impact with one parent. You can have an impact with one teacher, with one teacher's aide. Talking about applied behavior analysis and helping people understand why it is important to take on our values of reliable data, focusing on behavior, promoting data-based behavior change decisions, why that's valuable and important for the individuals that we work with. All right, let's move on. So for this week, I want you to read chapters 10 and 11 of Bailey and Birch. Read codes 5 and 6 of the BACB's Professional and Ethical Compliance Code for Behavior Analysts, and do the assignment. This week's assignment's a little different. Code 6.02 states that a responsibility of behavior analysts is to help educate the general public about the profession. In the discussion forum, I want you to state how you have disseminated information about ABA. Or, if you don't feel like you have an example, how you could, in your current position, now that you've thought about it, how could you disseminate behavior analysis? And then I want you to comment on at least one other student's posting about how they either have been or how they plan on disseminating a behavior analysis in the future. All right, as usual, if you have any questions, you can post them on in the discussion forum, or you can send me an email. And have a good week, and we will talk next week.